But today I wanted to talk about confluence of three different things and how they sort of all relate to each other. One is BaOmer, because that's what today is. Two is the rebellion of Bar Kochva, a rebel against the Roman Empire, against Hadrian Empire, the emperor, and also Rabbi Akiva. We also have a tradition that his students died during this time of year. They stopped dying on BaOmer, and the question is, did they die from the rebellion? Were his students also followers of Bar Kochva and therefore they died in the rebellion? Or is there two different things? Rabbi Akiva had students. They died in a plague. They had their own coronavirus, not a novel virus, not the new virus. They had the old one. And they all died. And later he only had 5 students left, and they're the ones who wrote the Mishnah and the Midrash and everything else. And also, Rabbi Akiva happened to be a great supporter of Bar Kochva. It's two different things. Or are they connected? So with the Talmud in Yevamot, in one of the tractates in the Talmud, says that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students. We know that Talmudic students like to study in pairs. Chavruta, I say something, you argue with it. You say something, I argue with it. 12,000 pairs, so 24,000 students. And they were from here to there in Israel, all over the place. And all of them died at the same time. And the rabbis, of course, always try to attribute what did they do wrong? They didn't give honor one to another. Now, people say that's very strange. Rabbi Akiva taught that we should love our neighbor as ourselves is one of the most important principles in the Torah. So why did the students not honor each other? He said, he taught them to love each other. He didn't teach them to treat them with extra honor. In other words, I might say, Jeremy's a great guy, but I'm not going to give him any honor. I mean, he's not better than I am. But the rabbis say, no, you should treat everyone like they're more important than you are. And that was the problem. And Torah almost came to an end until he taught 5 students. Instead of the 24,000 students, he now had 5 students. And they were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Lazar, and Shemua. And it is those students who revived Torah. Now, when did they die exactly? The same time. They say it was between Pesach and Shavuot. Some editions of the text in the Sefer HaManig, in a medieval work, say that they died between Pesach and Pros HaTzeret, half of Shavuos, which some people interpret to mean Lag BaOmer. So this was the great day when the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. Now, if you're not experiencing a pandemic and you think you're going to have a celebration because people stopped dying, it may seem kind of odd. But now, in the midst of a pandemic right here, could you picture if there was a day when it said in the front page of the New York Times and front page of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, it said, today there were no deaths from coronavirus in the whole world. Wow. That would be a great day. That would be a special day for all of us, for Israel. So today is that day when they stopped dying. Now, is that related to the fact of Rabbi Akiva's support for Bar Kochva? So how do we know Rabbi Akiva supported the rebellion? So it says in the Jerusalem Talmud, there are 2 Talmuds. One is from Israel. They call it the Jerusalem Talmud. It says that Rabbi Akiva gave Bar Kochva a new name. Instead of Bar Kochva, his name used to be Kochva, which means it's probably the town he came from. But it also means false, oddly. But Kochva, they called him the Bar Kochva, the son of a star. An allusion to the verse, next slide please. An allusion to the verse that says that Dorach Kochav Miyakov, that a star will come forth from, next slide. A star will come forth from Jacob. There's a prophecy from Bilam in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, that a star will come forth from Jacob. And Rabbi Akiva said, Bar Kochva is really Bar Kochva, and he's the one who's a star, he's the Messiah, and he's going to save us. According to the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva said, this is the King Messiah. And Yochanan ben Torta said, Akiva, grass will go from your cheeks, and the son of David will not have come. You'll be dead, and Mashiach is not coming. This fellow is not what we've all looked forward to. Next slide. So there is a debate. Did Rabbi Akiva, we know Rabbi Akiva's students died. There was some kind of a plague or some sort of a death. It happened very briefly, very suddenly. We know that Rabbi Akiva supported Bar Kochva. If you support Bar Kochva and you tell your students, well, young people like to fight, they probably got involved and they were probably condemned and maybe they died. So the great historian Shmuel Safrai, he says, yes, it's the same event. Rabbi Akiva's students died from the rebellion. The rabbis weren't so politically interested. It was many centuries later. They didn't really care. They said they died from a plague. But really, it's hiding the fact that they died from being military students of his students, supporters of Bar Kochva rebellion. They were all put to death. Rabbi Isaac Herzog, who was not only the chief rabbi of Israel, but was a PhD and a great scholar, says, no, it's two different episodes. It's the wrong, the dating is all off. The plague was earlier, the Bar Kochva rebellion was later. So we have a debate. We don't know for sure if today is connected with the stoppage of the death from the Bar Kochva rebellion or not. Now, how bad was the when they put down the rebellion, how bad was it? By some estimations, 180,000 people died. And although ancient historians said it, and the rabbis describe, such devastation, sometimes you wonder about ancient figures. So one historian said, yes, we believe that these figures are real. It's a huge devastation. The Romans squelched our rebellion, destroyed us completely, as we'll see in a moment. The Rambam, Maimonides, in codifying the destruction of Beitar, that's the main city of Bar Kochva at that time, says it was captured, it was inhabited by tens of thousands of Jews. Unless you doubt it, historians back it up as well. Next slide. So what was the Bar Kochva rebellion? Well, Hadrian was the Roman emperor throughout the world in 117 to 138 CE, in the Common Era. And the Bar Kochva rebellion was toward the end of his reign, 132 to 135. 3 years of rebellion against the Romans. Some say that when the Roman Emperor Hadrian vowed to rebuild Jerusalem from the wreckage, we were very excited. And he was thinking of rebuilding Jerusalem as a gift to the Jews. But apparently the Samaritans or somebody messed it up. And Hadrian visited, and then he decided to build it as a Roman colony, which would be inhabited by legionnaires, and he would dedicate the new city to himself and particularly to Jupiter. He'd make a temple on a temple mount to Jupiter. So instead of being a temple to God, the temple, which had been destroyed in the year 70, again, we're about 50 years after the destruction of the temple, the Jews are hoping maybe the Roman, he's a nice guy, maybe he'll rebuild the temple. And he was thinking about it. And then he changes his mind. Imagine how disappointed the Jews were. And not only that, but he's going to put a Jupiter in our temple, and on Temple Mount. So the Bar Kochva rebellion took 3 years. It enraged Hadrian, and he became determined to erase Judaism. He started decreeing that you couldn't have circumcision, and the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem. And he called the whole area Syria Palestina. That's where the terrible name Palestine, which Jews live with, Jews and Arabs, we all lived in Palestine until the Jews renamed it Israel. But it was an insult to the Jewish people. They're going to call it Palestine. Why Palestine? Because it reminds us of our Philistine enemies, who are enemies. It's the worst name you could have for a Jewish country. And there's a debate as to whether the anti-Jewish decrees were before the Bar Kochva rebellion, which spurred the Bar Kochva rebellion, or that once he started rebelling, then he became so anti-Jewish. Now, there was a very important historian, Cassius Dio, a Roman historian, a Roman senator, who wrote a Roman history that's considered a very good history. And he gives a detail there. He says, at Jerusalem, Hadrian founded a city in place of the one which had been razed to the ground by the Romans, naming it Aelia Capitolina. And on the site of the temple, he raised a new temple to Jupiter. This brought on a war of no slight importance nor brief duration. The Jews deemed it intolerable that a foreign races should be settled in their city and foreign religious rites planted there. So long indeed as Hadrian was close by in Egypt and again in Syria, they remained quiet, save insofar as they purportedly made of poor quality such weapons as they were called to furnish in order that the Romans might reject them and they themselves might then have use of them. But when Hadrian went farther away, they openly revolted. 50 of their most important outposts and cities, and 985 of their most important villages were razed to the ground. We mean razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole Judea was made desolate, result of which the people who had a forewarning before the war. For the tomb of Solomon, which the Jews regarded as an object of veneration, I didn't know about this, fell to pieces of itself and collapsed, and many wolves and hyenas rushed howling to their cities. It was total devastation. Next slide. So who was this Bar Kochva figure? If we want to link him with Rabbi Akiva wouldn't say, I don't know whether he would say that some very sacrilegious fellow was the Mashiach. Maybe not. Maybe it could be. But how religious was this fellow? So it's interesting. We found letters of Bar Kochva in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Bar Kochva caves, and this is one of the letters right there. Next slide. First line says Shimon, and the third line is very hard to read. It's sort of not exactly the script we have today. It's not exactly not the script, and it says something about Sukkot and about Lulavin and Etrogim, the celebration of Sukkot. So he sent a letter to someone. We need Lulavim and Etrogim. Etrogim and Lulavim and Etrogim. So we see that he was a functioning Jewish person like you would expect a Jewish person to be in those days. What else? Let's continue. Right? That's the third line. Now, here's a big question. Did he capture Jerusalem? So we have a coin, which if you look in the newspaper in the Jerusalem Post yesterday, they said that they discovered another one of these coins. There are very few of them. But he took the Roman coins and he overlaid it with the seal of a Jewish symbol. This could be a bundle for a lulav and for an etrog in the middle there. And it says, you'll see in a moment, it says for the capture of Jerusalem, for the liberation of Jerusalem, freedom of Jerusalem. Is that a prayer? Is that a coinage? He says, look, this is the first year from the liberation of Jerusalem, the second year, liberation of Jerusalem. Did he liberate Jerusalem? Did he not liberate Jerusalem? And who knows? Who wants to take a guess? What is that a picture of on the left? That left side of the coin, what is that a picture of?
Temple.
Sorry. The temple, correct. And what's in the middle of it?
The Torah?
Could be. It could be an ark. So he used religious symbolism. Again, doesn't make him a great tzaddik or a big Hasidic Rebbe, but he used religious symbols, a lulav, a temple. He's fighting for the temple. He's fighting for the Jerusalem. So did he capture Jerusalem or didn't? Out of 22,000 ancient coins found in the old city of Jerusalem, only 4 can be traced back to the Bar Kochva rebellion, and we found one the other day. So what does that tell me? Was Bar Kochva and were his people using his coinage in Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Well, only a little bit. Only 4 out of 22,000. Not very much. So a lot of historians say, no, he did not capture Jerusalem. I saw an article that said maybe he did capture Jerusalem. It's generally assumed he didn't capture Jerusalem. But he was trying to. It was part of his goal. He had a coin about it. And here's a map. I'm sorry, it's a little twisted. But all those red areas are areas where at one point or another in his rebellion, different years, say the year 60, in these different years, he captured different parts. For instance, where is Beitar? So Beitar is south of Jerusalem. My Yeshivat Har Zion, is about 7 miles south of Jerusalem. I'm sorry, Bethlehem is 7 miles south of Jerusalem. 7 miles south of that is Gush Etzion. And in Gush Etzion somewhere is Beitar. Today it's an ultra-Orthodox city. It's funny, that area. The Arabs actually call one area near there Khirbut El Yehud. So Khirbut sounds like Charuv. It's destroyed, a destroyed Jewish city, as it was known by the Arabs, by all people in the area. This was an area that used to be a tremendous settlement of Jews, and now it's been destroyed. Next slide. So he had quite a swath of land. He may have conquered Jerusalem. Now, how did Bar Kochva die? So the Gemara has a kind of a funny story, and Gemara, all the stories tell, and the Talmud tells are true, but some of them are more true than others. The Talmud lived in years, centuries after Bar Kochva, and they told the story the way they want to remember the story. But there could be other ways to remember the story. Talmud says that Bar Kochva, they call him the false Kazav is a lie. The false Bar Kochva, false Messiah, he ruled for 2.5 years. We said 3, more or less the same thing. He said to the sages, on the Messiah. They said to him, with regard to Messiah, it's written that he's able to smell and judge. It's a very funny thing. When you and I judge something, we think about it. But they say that the Messiah, V'haricho b'yirat Hashem, he will be judging all the nations, and he'll smell something. Most people say that it means that he'll have a spirit of God. The rabbis took it to mean the hariach, he's going to smell. He'll be so smart, he could look at something and say, this fellow smells guilty, this fellow smells innocent. By the way, there were later rabbis who also claimed to be semi-messianic, and they would decide things by smell, like Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah in the 1600s. And they brought him something, he would say, smells kosher, smells not kosher. There were Hasidic rabbis, they would bring him a chicken, he would smell it and decide if it was kosher. So they gave him the smell test. Maybe he had corona, maybe that was the problem. And he failed the smell test, and they killed him. Well, it says here the Gentiles killed him, maybe the Jews killed him. The Talmud is unclear. If they're saying the Jews killed him, that's disputed by other sources. If they're saying the Gentiles killed him, then it's, that would be what you'd expect, that he fought a valiant fight, and eventually he lost, and the Gentiles killed him. Next slide. So if the Talmud might imply that the Jews killed him, the Rambam writes that on the 9th of Av, we commemorate many things, and one of them is that there was a great city named Beitar, 4th line, and it was inhabited by tens of thousands of Jews. They had a great ruler, thought by them all, including the great scholars, Rabbi Akiva, to be the King Messiah. So he calls him a great ruler. So the Rambam is pro Bar Kochva. He thought he was a great ruler. But he fell in the hands of the Roman pagans, who killed them all. Calamity as great as the destruction of a temple. Thousands of Jews die. It's as great as the destruction of a temple. Thousands of people have died recently. It's also a great destruction. So it happened on that very day. On that day, the wicked Turnus Rufus, who's also Hadrian, plowed up the temple site. Also, Zion, it fulfills the prophet of Jeremiah, Zion shall be plowed like a field. So also a reference to Hadrian. So the Rambam thinks that the Romans killed him. Talmud might be saying that the Jews killed him because he wasn't a good Messiah, a false Messiah. How do we remember Beitar today? We have, if Meitav is still with us, we have Meitav with us. She can tell us more about it. Let me just share with you some of my reflections, and I'd like to hear from Meitav too. The number one, and religiously speaking, we remember Beitar not only by commemoration on the 9th of Av, but also in a grace after meals. This is a very bizarre thing I'm about to tell you. Every time we bench, we say, Hu heitiv, hu meitiv, hu yetiv lanu. That God was good to us, he is good to us, he's going to be always good to us. And the rabbis say, next slide, what does it mean he's good and he was good? What does it mean? He does good that they did not putrefy. Those bodies that the Romans left on the hills of Israel, the bodies, it was a miracle. They didn't let us bury the dead, but the bodies didn't putrefy, so we could bury them. And what does it mean that God is good? That we buried the dead. Every day when a Jew benches and says the grace after meal to Birkat Hamazon, a Jew is remembering that, wow, there was a great plague. 185,000 people died. And thank you, God, we got to bury them. Now, after the Holocaust, we realize how great that is, right? Millions of people died, and they were never buried. So we say, thank you, God. These people died, yes, but they were buried, and there's something to that. I'm sure many parents in Israel who, like my friends, the BaOmer of Zachary BaOmer, when his body was not found, they were so upset. And his mother lived to see that he was buried. They say, thank God, Zachary BaOmer was buried. It's a great thing. Well, think about that. What if today is like a Thanksgiving? Not Thanksgiving for the good times. Thank God we're alive. Thank God you and I did not die from corona. Thank God that Memphis is not New York City. Thank God for the small things. That's what BaOmer teaches us. Thank God people stopped dying. That's the kind of Thanksgiving today is. It's a very special kind of thing, and we say it every day in the bench. What about in modern Israel? So there are many books in Israel. Yigal Yadin, the great archaeologist in the early Israel, the 60s, he was very interested. And you can find, so many of you who've seen the table, the coffee table books of Bar Kochva rebellion, Yigal Yadin, famous archaeologist. Israelis were very interested. Zionists were very interested in Bar Kochva as a figure, the last great fighter of Israel. If those of you who are philatelists know that there's something known as Doar Ivri. There were stamps that Jews made in the 47 before Israel became a state. They made these different stamps, very primitive, and they're very valuable today. Doar Ivri, and it shows a matbea mitkufat Amar Hashini, that it shows a coin from the Bar Kochva rebellion. It doesn't show the one we showed before, and this coin says for the first year for the redemption of Israel. And we identify with it. We, in 1948 or 1947, identify with Bar Kochva fighting in 132. Go back to the previous one. Later, Israel was founded, and there it is. It mentions 132, the year of the rebellion, 132 to 135, and it talks about the war of Bar Kochva. And it's a tribute to Bar Kochva, and there are Bar Kochva coins. Let's go up a couple of slides. Later on, you may remember this stamp was very famous. They had Giborei Israel, the heroes of Israel. So I don't know, they probably had Samson and biblical heroes and other people, and they had Bar Kochva, who was known as a lion. There are stories. There's an Israeli song that children sing that he was thrown into the gladiators and he destroyed the lion. I don't know whether that's true or not, but there is a song like that. So they made a stamp to him. For Israelis, Bar Kochva was resuscitated as one of the great heroes of all history, someone that Israeli fighters could relate to, an ancient Jew who was a fighter and not just a scholar. Continue. There are children's videos about Bar Kochva. Next, there are also children's books. Maybe some of you have seen that book. It's an old book from years ago. Many shuls have it on their shelves. It's an old book about Bar Kochva, telling the children the story of Bar Kochva. We're so proud of the great Bar Kochva. Next slide. Probably there is a Bar Kochva forest. Next slide. Maybe Meitav can tell us, but I assume in every city in Israel there's a Bar Kochva street because he's one of our great heroes. So there's a Bar Kochva street. Now, let's recognize that this wasn't always this way. If you would ask Rashi I don't know about the Rambam might say Bar Kochva was a great hero. If you ask Rashi or Tosfot or the Rush or the Ramban or if you ask a lot of scholars over the centuries, who are your great heroes? They could list thousands of people before they would get to Bar Kochva. They wouldn't think about Bar Kochva. But as we reestablished Israel, we start to think, hey, Bar Kochva, he was the last one who was like us. And next, you have different streets, but here's another Bar Kochva street. And then look at this, the next slide. If you want to get on Bar Kochva Street in Herzliya, if you want to get a home, well, you can get, if you want 2 rooms, you can get a room for approximately 1,600,000 shekels, be about 400,000. Or if for 3 rooms, if you have 5 rooms, you could, for 3 million shekel, you could get a nice apartment. So if anybody's interested, you speak to Jeremy later. I'm sure he could take a nice commission. But in any event, we go to the next slide. They actually made a commemorative coin. They took the old ancient coin. They made an actual gold coin you can buy for $1,000, $1,200. This beautiful coin, Matbea Bar Kochva Yushalayim, from I think it's talking. It gives the Hebrew year for that year, 132 in Hebrew, and so there's a beautiful. So Israelis take Bar Kochva very, very seriously. And in that sense, if you connect Rabbi Akiva with Bar Kochva, and you say that today is the day the students of Bar Kochva stop dying, then today is the day where we celebrate the the people who died from the Bar Kochva rebellion stopped dying. In that sense, like BaOmer would be sort of a Bar Kochva kind of a holiday. Next slide. But I promised to talk about Rabbi Akiva. And why do you think Rabbi Akiva was attracted to Bar Kochva? What is it about him? In some ways, those of you familiar with Rabbi Kook, Rav Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook, it's a similar character. Someone who's filled with love of Jews, love of Israel, love of the land of Israel. And let's think about Rabbi Akiva. I want to point to three things about him. His marriage. He married this woman who was so rich, but her father disowned her when she married him because he was so ignorant. So he loved her, and they slept in the barn, and he plucked the hair out of her head, and he said, when we get rich, I'm going to make you a beautiful tiara, a beautiful crown of gold. And when the father-in-law saw that he was a great scholar, he re-inherited him, and he repatriated him, and he became very wealthy, and he gave his wife a beautiful golden crown. He said that everything he had was because of his wife Rachel. When he died, he said, "Oh, I'm so happy that the Romans are combing my skin off my head, because I get to fulfill the love of God. I always wanted to love God with all of my life, and now I get to do it." He was so glad to fulfill the mitzvah of loving God with his life. And what did he say? He said, love of your fellow man. This is a great principle in the Torah. He didn't say it was the greatest. It was a great principle in the Torah. It's one of the great principles in the Torah, to love your neighbor as yourself. So what do these three things tell us? He had a loving relationship with his wife. He died with the love of God on his lips. He said that the loving your fellow man is your greatest thing. So when he saw that someone could save the Jewish people and take us out of our misery, and we could have dignity again, what do you think he would do other than to support Bar Kochva? No one else got it. The other friends and colleagues, they were against him. But he had so much love and so much hope. Next slide. He also was a man of great hope. One time they were walking in Jerusalem, and when they saw the Mount Scopus, where you can see the Temple Mount, they all started to rip their garments. And he said, "What are you ripping your garments? I'm so excited. I'm so happy." He was laughing. Where they saw destruction, he was hoping for rebuilding and redemption. Final slide. Even after the temple was destroyed, he said, "Don't give up hope. You guys are like the mikveh of Israel." Mikveh means hope, like tikva, hatikva, and it means mikveh. And God is the hope of Israel. He said, "Don't give up hope. There's always hope." So he had so much hope. It was natural. He was attracted to Bar Kochva as the one who brought hope to the Jewish people. So, Jeremy, you can take the slide. You can stop sharing. And I'll just share some final thoughts. So, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Bar Kochva captured Jerusalem? Do you think that the students of Rabbi Akiva died from some mysterious plague, maybe diphtheria or something? Or do you think cholera? Or was it they're really the students of Bar Kochva? I'd like to hear your thoughts about this loving man and his love, and if there's a connection between those who love people and those who love Israel. Those who are more tolerant, perhaps, of a strange military leader who he did strange things. They say the students of Rabbi Akiva, of Bar Kochva, they would do very strange feats. They would cut off their finger as an initiation rite. They were kind of a strange bunch, but it took the love of Rabbi Akiva to say, no, this strange man, he could save Israel. As Rav Kook in our modern times said, this Ben Gurion and Herzl and these characters who are a little different for a yeshiva bacher, for a rosh yeshiva, for a religious rabbi to think about who these people are. But with a love in his heart, he said, no, these are the redeemers of Israel. These are the people who are going to save the Jewish people. And I love them with all my heart. So with that, I open it to the crowd. Questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions. Meitav, want to share anything about Israel? We'll welcome anybody's comments and thoughts about how this image of Bar Kochva changed over the years. Things you hear about Bar Kochva. I open the floor. Meitav, tell us how you grew up with the image of Bar Kochva. Was Bar Kochva a common word on your lips as an Israeli? What city did you live in?
Modi'in. And I just told my mom this morning that it's amazing to see what's the difference
how you educate about BaOmer here, that the focus is much more about Rabbi Akiva, and in Israel is much more about Bar Kochba. And I feel like it connects like the Zionist kind of like ethos, like the pioneers in Israel always tried to create this ethos of like the Israel that fight for the land. And I feel like maybe just the image of Bar Kochva, like the combat, kind of fit more this new Israeli they tried to create, like the character, and maybe that's why the focus is more on Bar Kochva. But all the things you showed, I 100% agree that like his image in Israel is really like strong when you talk about like BaOmer compared to the rest of the stories.
In the army, is there anything about Bar Kochva in the army initiation, or are there divisions that are called Bar Kochva, or anything like that? Is there, they use his name?
Not that I know. Maybe actually, it's interesting. Not that I know about. But yeah, you know, there are all the stories about the line, and all the songs are about like fighting, and like we will fight against the you know, the darkness and all this stuff. It's all about like fighting and not about other, you know, praying.
So think about what we did with it. Here's a man who led a rebellion. It failed. Thousands of people died. But the memory of that was so strong that 2,000 years later, it inspired soldiers who actually won the war and actually conquered Israel and did redeem Israel. So, you know, sometimes you can't put the verdict out on someone for 2,000 years because, right. But on the other hand, it's very bizarre, though. In all of Jewish history, you know, how many people like Bar Kochva were there? In biblical times, you had a bunch, but in the last 2,000 years, not many. So it was a struggle for the Zionist movement. Who do you pick and who do you choose? But it's interesting that, yeah.
No, yeah, and it's like really how, you know, how historians and like how the people that create like kind of shape history choose to emphasize, you know, what to emphasize. Like they will not teach us as kids that eventually he failed. They will talk about how, like, what a hero he was and like how he did whatever he can to save the people. Like, I don't remember ever to learn that eventually he failed. You know, that's like a small detail no one talks about. So it's really about how to, like, our leaders try to like kind of shape history to fit to what
Some
they
people
want.
would argue that the reaction, that if you look at the rabbis in the Talmud, they don't seem to talk about, you know, we're going to take back Israel and it's a mitzvah to go and kill the Romans. And one reason that the rabbis in the Talmud perhaps were so pacifist, they didn't seem interested in taking over Israel at all, was that they were so devastated by the memory of the Bar Kochva, you know, destruction, the Beitar destruction, that it was like never again. Their never again was never again will we fight with the Romans. That's not a good idea. But we didn't. That attitude didn't last forever. How about the rest? You in your Sunday schools, in your yeshivas, in your education about Judaism. Some of you are not from outside the Jewish community. Did you hear about Bar Kochva? Is it something you experienced? You surely studied in Israel. Was it something that you learned about in Canada or in Israel, as a child, or in Israel as a student?
I went.
How about you, Lenny, in Stern College? What do you say?
Well, I was going to tell you that. Does Shirley want to talk? Is Shirley going to say something?
I was going to say, yes, I went to Jewish school, so I did learn about Bar Kochba. Not that I remember a whole lot, but we did learn about him. Go ahead, Lenny.
No, I was just going to say my strongest memories of, you know, growing up here in Memphis, you know, and going to Sunday school also, besides the day school, is that the Sunday schools would all have picnics on BaOmer. That was the big thing. And what we learned is that, oh, you know, we have bows and arrows, and I think we may have even, I don't know if we had archery, we had all these contests, potato three-legged potato walking contest with one of those bags, but that the Jews would learn Torah in secret, and then they would, when the Romans were coming, they would take their bows and arrows out. And then we learned the song about Rabbi Akiva,
Right, so your teachers were connecting the Bar Kochba, BaOmer.
Right.
It was all connected, right?
Right. I didn't learn so much about Bar Kochba, I have to say, until college. I don't know.
But they were fighting. You're saying that they were, your image was that they were really learning Torah. The arrows were not Bar Kochba arrows. They were just playing for fun.
I don't know what they were doing, right?
Right. Yeah, I have to look into the origin of that custom. Yeah, we always hear about that. What else? Faye, how about you? Growing up, let's see. I don't want to say exactly when some of you grew up, but some of you may have grown up before Israel was founded. Did you hear about Bar Kochva in the early years? Faye, it's hard to hear you. Could you talk more right into the computer or something?
It was not have a very strong education. We had taught Torah, and it was mostly for the boys to see how fast they could read for their bar mitzvah, but there was not that much Jewish education before the Hebrew Academy.
How about you, Joe and Judy? What was do you have early memories of being educated about Bar Kochva?
Yes, when I was in Sunday school, for some reason, I got a book, and it was full of Jewish, tales, stories, whatever, and it was in there. It was all about him. Yeah, I read about him.
Right. How about Jennifer? You're sort of in the middle of some of the folks who just spoke. Is Bar Kochva in your consciousness or?
Not really. This is all new today.
Interesting. Right. Meitav, is that accurate that pretty much every city in Israel has a Bar Kochva something or other, like a street or a neighborhood or a park or something? No?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And also, it's interesting to hear that like a lot of people either didn't hear about Bar Kochva at all in school or just a bit. And it's funny because even when last year in BaOmer, when I had my class with the ECC, so I'm doing it like very basic. So I was like, obviously I will go and tell about Bar Kochba and the story with the lion. And I remember Miss Sarah was like, what? I never heard of that in my life. And for me, it was like obvious that that's what I'm gonna tell. So
yeah, I know one source I saw said that the lion story is simply an Israeli song, but I didn't research it fully. But I don't know.
I don't know, and I really have to search that because I don't know where it comes from. It's a big story.
Yeah, but the image of someone who could jump while standing on a horse and things like that, got the exact image. The Talmud actually discusses some of the tricks that he did. I didn't have a chance to bring them, but he was quite a hero. We have to realize this was a second rebellion. They refer to it as one of the stamps said the second rebellion. We rebelled the first time, and it resulted in the destruction of the temple. We could have sort of said, okay, the Romans will be in charge. We'll have our temple, and the Romans will be in charge. But we said, no, we're going to fight against them. And the temple was destroyed year 70. This is 50 years later. Not that much, right? It's less than like Israel was founded 70 years ago. 50 years later, they're trying to rebel again, and then they're totally quashed. And don't forget, this is the remnant. A lot of people had already been exiled in the year 70. So who's left? So whatever's left, they're being destroyed again. So it's very devastating, and it represents a turn in the Roman Empire. Shortly after that, the Roman Empire turns Christian. So it's all downhill there from there as far as the Jews go in Israel. I mean that in the sense that when the Roman Empire became Christian, it was somewhat oppressive for Jews in Israel because of the Constantine and all that. Any other comments? How about some of the non-Jewish participants here? Anybody? Did anyone ever hear of Bar Kochva before?
Rabbi, I was just going to make the comment that, like Lenny, I remember hearing a little bit about him. I remember the picnics on Lag BaOmer, But in the 70s, I read a book, Son of a Star, which is a novelization, similar to what Leon Uris wrote, Exodus, which is about Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kochba. And so I got a little knowledge, but it reminds me of something in the United States. Every southern state has a Fayette County or a Fayetteville or a Fayette Street.
Yeah,
that's all from Jean Lafitte, who was a pirate. He was a very reprehensible person, but he met, I believe it was Andrew Jackson. They became friends. He brought a few shiploads of soldiers that helped the United States, and that was all he brought. But because of that, as I said, every single, I think, southern state has either a Fayette County, Fayette City. History repeats itself. So when you were showing the pictures of the Bar Kochba Street all throughout Israel, it reminded me of the same type thing. So whether the legend,
pirate, it's interesting. I think from a Roman perspective, he was definitely a pirate.
well,
For us, he was a freedom
from
fighter.
some of the other books I read, Bar Kochba before Rabbi Akiva met him may not have been, a sterling character, but he changed and did what he did. And as so often in history, the legend probably is much larger than what the man was, but it is very interesting.
This question of whether it's Rabbi Akiva students who died, that's really a minor question. The real question is, okay, Rabbi Akiva supported the rebellion, but did he have a lot of students, like big Talmudic scholars and all, who also joined him in that support, or he was sort of a voice in the dark, where he was this optimistic figure who thought everything was going to be great, and everybody else was like, who are you kidding? So it's an interesting question of how many of Bar Kochba's students had any connection with this whole world of learning and yeshivas and all that, whether it was the two different worlds. And Rabbi Akiva happened to be the link between them or not. But, so this idea that it was his students means that there were all these, that the students of Bar Kochva were all these yeshiva students, So was it more like today where there's the yeshiva students and then there's the fighters and the twain don't always meet? But if it is a true image, then it's a good model for the modern Hesder yeshivas where you fight in the army and also be in yeshiva at the same time. So these questions can sort of not only be historical questions, but they can guide us today as to how to live our lives. Who we consider our heroes is very much connected to who we are.